I thank the chairman. I think, as all of us know, Chairman Frank and I have very different views on this, and we approach this very differently. He wants to legalize internet gambling, and then he wants to tax it. On the other hand, I believe that internet gambling is and has been and will continue to be a substantial threat to our youth, and that any economic benefit from taxing internet gambling would be more than offset by the harm it causes our young people. And we have had hearing after hearing where experts demonstrated or testified to really what we have is a wave of young Americans who are addicted to gambling and the problems that causes, which are in many cases heartbreaking. I saw an article in the New York Times where one mother wrote a letter to the editor describing the horror that had been created from her son, who she basically has lost to internet gambling. Internet gambling characteristics are unique. Online players can gamble 24 hours a day, 7 days a week from home. Children may play without sufficient age verification, and they can bet with a credit card. We've had testimony before that this undercuts a player, particularly a young person's perception of the value of cash, that the younger you become engaged in this behavior, the more addictive it is. It actually wires the brains of some of our young people. It leads to addiction, bankruptcy, and crime. We've actually had testimony that one of the most outstanding young football players from a Florida university, his whole career was ruined, and that career started with internet gambling at a young age. He, in fact, was arrested for burglarizing a business to pay for gambling debts. Young people are particularly at risk because if you put a computer in a bedroom or a dorm room of a young person, it's a temptation that many fall prey to. It is simply asking too much of young people that they resist this temptation. The chairman talks about America and what it stands for, and one of the things it stands for is not telling adults what they can and cannot do. But one thing that America also stands for, and I think every society, whether it's American society or any other society, I think one of our #1 goals ought to be protecting our youth. We certainly do not allow people to come into their bedroom and serve them liquor at a young age or sell them pornography. And the fact that the chairman says, well, you know, you can buy pornography on the internet, you can order liquor on the internet, you ought to be able to allow internet gambling. I think makes no sense whatsoever. For more than a decade, the majority of this Congress has worked for and voted for legislation to combat illegal internet gambling. It's always been illegal in the United States, but no one could enforce the law because these criminal enterprises operated offshore. They operated offshore because that removed them from the long arm of not only the Justice Department but also other law enforcement agencies. We've had letters from the great majority of attorney generals telling us that without some legislation, such as the legislation that we passed in 2006, they were powerless to stop internet gambling, which was against the law of all their states. And I'll remind anyone who's interested in this subject that it is the states and the people of the states, adults in those states, which have gone to the polls or their legislative representatives have passed laws saying that illegal internet gambling should be stopped. The states prohibit it, and the last time I looked, all of them did it through a democratic process. In a nation of law, it only makes sense to try to put these illegal internet criminal enterprises out of business, not reward them as the chairman would do. Congress took a major step towards protecting our youth and stopping this illegal activity with the passage of the 2006 Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act. It's that act that the chairman continues to try to repeal or postpone an enactment of, and obviously he has allies at the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve, who last week announced that they were again delaying implementation of the law another 6 months. These regulations should have been finalized and implemented more than 2 years ago. This Congress voted, the House voted by overwhelming number, over 330 members, as I recall, over 3/4 of the Congress, to stop illegal internet gambling. And Mr. Chairman, I think it's time for you, the Treasury, and the Fed to stop delaying the will of the great majority of this Congress and the American people, quit the foot dragging, and enforce this law. The Fed's not here today. The chairman didn't ask the Fed or the Justice Department to come in and defend themselves because they really have no defense. It's they that ought to be testifying today and not most of the witnesses, many of which their studies are funded by the gambling industry, or their associations are supported by the gambling industry. The absence of the Justice Department and the Federal Reserve is particularly egregious in light of a letter I received from the FBI earlier this month. Without objection, I'd like to submit that letter for the record now.
Without objection.
In the letter, the FBI warns that technology exists to facilitate undetectable manipulation of online poker games. The FBI warns that technology can be used in peer-to-peer games to illegally transfer ill-gotten gains from one person to another. The FBI in their letter rejects claims from vendors who say they can validate age and location. The witnesses today are going to again testify that that technology is available to keep minors off the internet, off gambling on the internet. The FBI's letter rejects that contention. So the law enforcement agency, the federal law enforcement agency, actually says they can, that these so-called protections won't work. Before the UIGEA, offshore internet casinos were proliferating, raking in more than $6 billion annually from Americans. $6 billion. We found out through disclosures that about $40 million of that's been spent right here in Washington, D.C., hiring lobbyists. One of the first lobbyists they hired was Abraham. If Congress repeals the law, we'll continue to have these online casinos. In the next 5 years, Chairman Frank, I feel that if you're successful in creating a federal right to gamble on the internet, we will create a generation of tens of millions of Americans who from their youth will be addicted to internet gambling and therefore lifelong problem gamblers. But that's a problem for all of us. Gamblers will be able to place bets not only from their home computers but also from their BlackBerries as they drive home from work or their iPhones as they wait in line at the grocery store. One company has already developed an iPhone gambling software and plans to release it whenever the law is reversed. They've announced that. I'll do everything I can to make sure this never happens. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, supporters of legalization of internet gambling argue that prohibition has sent internet gambling underground and left the vulnerable unprotected. But that was the case before our law. The vulnerable were unprotected because companies that tapped the American market violated our laws and our protections. No amount of regulation can begin to protect against this particularly predatory and abusive intrusion into American homes and the harm it is causing our youth. No approach to blocking internet gambling will ever be perfect, but what we have fashioned is our best hope. I yield back the balance of my time.
Well,